Rejected Omega was sold with her baby, until the Alpha King said, "I'll be dad and husband both." Wooden stalls painted in faded colors lined the dusty streets of the city, each one holding goods, animals, or, sometimes, the unfortunate souls who could be sold. Lyra, an Omega of barely 20 summers, clutched her infant son, Kieran, tightly to her chest. The bundle of warmth was all that kept her from feeling utterly lost. Her heart thudded painfully as she stood before the largest stall, the one she knew would seal her fate. The buyers were already there, their eyes scanning the gathered crowd for anything of value. Her chest tightened. She had no wealth, no influence, only her baby and the small silver necklace her mother had left her. "Is this one included with the child?" a harsh voice asked. The man speaking was tall, his cloak dark and unyielding like a shadow moving against the sun. Lyra's stomach churned. The thought of being sold, of losing Kieran, made her want to scream, but screaming was useless here. The crowd had grown silent, sensing the tension. Mothers whispered to daughters, children tugged at their parents' sleeves. The rules of this cruel market were clear, the weak had no say. Lyra's voice trembled. "Please, I beg, we belong together. Do not separate us." The man laughed softly, but it was not a comforting sound. "Belonging is not what the world offers. It offers survival." Her arms tightened around Kieran. He stirred, wailing, as if he understood the danger. Lyra's eyes darted to the crowd, hoping, praying for a miracle. That was when she saw him. He stood tall at the edge of the market, his presence commanding even among the merchants and buyers. Kale, the Alpha King of the Northern Realm, had arrived. Cloaked in dark blue and gold, he looked every bit the king whispered about in legends. Cold, untouchable, a man who had taken no mate in decades. Yet his eyes, piercing and silver, seemed to linger on Lyra and her child. Lyra felt her breath catch. It was impossible. Kings did not wander the market for ordinary souls, and yet here he was, watching them. The shadowy buyer, the man who had bid for Lyra and Kieran, frowned at Kale's gaze. "And who are you to interfere, Alpha King?" Kale's voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of authority that silenced the market. "I am the one who will decide what happens here." The buyer smirked, confident. "Then you may witness, but you cannot stop this transaction. She and the child are mine to claim." Kale stepped forward, the crowd parting before him. Every movement was precise, deliberate. "If she is yours to claim, then I claim her from you." Shock rippled through the marketplace. No one dared to speak. Not even the guards dared challenge the king. Lyra blinked. The world around her seemed to tilt. Could this be real? Was the man she had only dared to dream about, the king himself, here to save her? The buyer's smirk vanished. "You dare?" he spat. Kale's eyes narrowed. "I do not ask permission." In a flash, Kale moved. His guards flanked him, moving with swift, silent precision. Within moments, Lyra and Kieran were being led away from the stall, the buyer shouting threats that were drowned out by the sound of Kale's commanding voice. Lyra's heart raced so fast it felt like it would shatter her chest. She clung to Kieran, unsure whether to cry or to hope. Her legs trembled as Kale approached, stopping just close enough that she could see the faintest softness in his otherwise stern gaze. "You are safe," he said, almost as a whisper meant only for her. Yet the words carried a weight that made her shiver. "For now." Lyra's voice was barely audible. Why are you helping us?" Kale's gaze shifted, as if he were seeing not just a desperate mother and her child, but something far more significant. "Because I do not allow cruelty in my kingdom when I can prevent it." Lyra swallowed hard. The truth in his eyes was undeniable, yet fear still gripped her. "They will come for us," she whispered, her voice breaking. Kale nodded. "And we will face them together." The words were simple, yet they carried a promise stronger than any chain. Lyra felt a flicker of hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. But even as she followed him, fear coiled tightly around her heart. They walked swiftly through the twisting streets, leaving behind the market's chaos. Lyra kept Kieran close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against hers, grounding her trembling thoughts. Finally, they reached the gates of a towering palace, its walls carved from gray stone that seemed to drink in the light of the setting sun. Kale moved with a purpose, each step echoing authority. Lyra, still hesitant, followed, feeling like she had stepped into another world entirely. Inside, the palace was vast and cold, but not unwelcoming. Torches lined the halls, casting shadows that danced like silent sentinels. Kale led her to a chamber overlooking the mountains, the view breathtaking even through the heavy clouds that hung low in the sky. "You will stay here," Kale said. "No one will harm you or the child." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had never imagined such safety, such protection. "I thank you," she whispered, though the words felt insufficient. Kale's gaze softened, though only slightly. "Do not thank me yet. We are not free from danger. The world is cruel, and there are those who would see you harmed for the smallest gain." Lyra's fingers tightened around Kieran. She felt the weight of responsibility and fear pressing down on her. And yet, beneath it, a fragile hope began to bloom. Hours passed, and the palace seemed both vast and lonely. Lyra could hear the distant roar of the mountains, the wind carrying whispers of a kingdom that seemed almost alive. Kale remained nearby, silent, as if respecting her space but always watching. Finally, as the night deepened and the torches flickered low, Lyra's thoughts turned to the market, to the buyer, and to the cruel world outside the palace walls. She shivered, imagining what would have happened if Kale had not intervened. Kale's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "You fear losing him, don't you?" Lyra looked up, startled. "Yes, yes, I do. I cannot bear the thought." He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "And you will not have to. I will not allow it. Your bond with him, with your son, is stronger than any force that seeks to break it." Lyra felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, but the world had taught her to expect betrayal, cruelty, and loss. Still, there was something in his presence that made her heart ache in ways she did not understand. A sudden crash echoed from the palace gates, distant but unmistakable. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Someone is testing us," he said, his voice now sharp, commanding. Lyra's pulse quickened. What do we do?" Kale's expression was unreadable, but his tone left no doubt. "We prepare. The world is not yet done with us." The night stretched long, and Lyra sat beside the hearth with Kieran in her lap. The warmth of the fire and the safety of the palace were a fragile comfort. She felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation, knowing that her life had changed in a single day, yet uncertain of what lay ahead. Outside, shadows moved across the walls, and the wind whispered secrets of power, danger, and fate. Lyra hugged her son closer, a tiny, fragile shield against the unknown. She didn't yet understand the bond she had formed with Kale, or the mysteries that surrounded her and Kieran, but she knew one thing: her life was no longer her own. And somewhere in the darkness, Kale's presence lingered, a promise, a protector, and perhaps something more. The market, the buyer, the cruel world, none of it mattered anymore, at least for now. But as Lyra closed her eyes, she could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the shadows would not rest, and that the bond forming between her, her child, and the Alpha King was about to be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The first night in the palace passed with restless dreams. Lyra awoke to the sound of distant shouting, the echo of hooves, and a tension she could feel deep in her bones. Someone was coming, and the true test of her survival and of Kale's promise was only just beginning. The palace was silent after the night of shadows. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long, dancing shapes that made the halls look alive. Lyra held Kieran close as she walked through the wide corridors, her steps echoing softly. The child's soft breathing was the only sound that comforted her. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the mountains sighing under the weight of the night. Kale had stayed beside her after the shadow had disappeared. His presence was a comfort she could not explain, but it was also unsettling. He was calm, unyielding, and every glance he gave her seemed to pierce her very thoughts. Lyra wanted to trust him, to feel safe, but a part of her held back, clinging to the fear that life would not allow her a moment of peace. "You must rest," Cale said softly, his voice carrying through the hall. "You cannot care for the child if you are broken yourself." Lyra shook her head. "I cannot rest, not when someone is out there waiting." Cale studied her for a moment. His silver eyes were intense, thoughtful. "The world outside will always be dangerous," he said. "But here, you are under my protection. I will not allow harm to come to you or him." Lyra's hands tightened around Kieran. Why do you care?" Her voice was barely a whisper, almost lost among the shadows. Cale looked away briefly, his jaw tightening. "Because I cannot ignore injustice when I see it," he said. "And because I see a strength in you that is rare. You fight even when it seems hopeless." Lyra felt warmth bloom inside her chest, but she pushed it down. Strength had not saved her yet, it had only allowed her to survive. She did not trust words, even from a king. Over the next days, Lyra settled uneasily into the palace. Cale had given her a small chamber, simple but comfortable, with a view of the mountains and the valley below. Kieran slept in a cradle beside her bed, and the sound of his breathing was the anchor to her frayed nerves. Cale visited often, sometimes silently, sometimes speaking softly about the palace, the kingdom, and the dangers that lurked beyond the walls. Each time, Lyra felt a strange pull toward him, but she fought it. She had survived alone for too long to believe in safety, love, or loyalty from anyone, especially a king. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Cale found her in the small garden behind her chamber. Kieran played in a patch of soft grass, giggling softly, unaware of the dangers beyond the palace walls. Lyra watched him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. "You worry too much," Cale said from behind her, his voice calm but with a hint of amusement. Lyra turned slightly, startled. "I cannot help it," she admitted. "I am not used to feeling safe. Not really." Cale approached, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. The touch was firm but not overbearing, and Lyra felt her chest tighten. "Safety is not something you can force," he said. "It comes when the heart trusts, when the bond is stronger than fear." Lyra shook her head, stepping back. My heart has been broken too many times. I cannot just trust someone." Cale's eyes softened. "Then let me earn your trust," he said quietly, "not with words but with actions." Lyra felt something stir inside her. Actions. Perhaps that was something she could believe in. Days passed and Cale kept his promise. He never forced himself into her space. He spoke to her only when necessary, helped with Kieran when she requested, and always ensured that her child's needs were met. Slowly, she began to feel a fragile sense of security, though she never let her guard down completely. Then came the first sign that danger had not disappeared. A letter arrived, sealed with dark ink and a symbol that made Lyra's blood run cold. She opened it carefully, Kieran on her lap, and read the words aloud. "The curse is not broken. Only one will survive if the bond is not claimed." Cale took the letter from her hands, reading it with a frown. His jaw tightened, and for the first time Lyra saw fear in his eyes. "A curse?" she whispered. "What does it mean?" Cale turned to her, his gaze sharp. "It means that forces are at work that we do not yet understand," he said. "A dark power wants you, and it will not stop until it gets what it seeks." Lyra's heart pounded. We cannot fight magic," she said, her voice trembling. "We are only people." Cale shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "People can fight when they are brave, and you have more power than you realize. Your bond with Kieran is strong. That bond is magic in itself." Lyra's hands trembled. "Power? I don't understand." "You will," Cale said, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "I will help you, but you must trust me." That night the palace seemed more alive than ever. The wind howled and shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that made Lyra's stomach clench. She held Kieran close, whispering softly to calm him, while Kale sat nearby, silent but vigilant. Hours passed, and Lyra began to drift into a light sleep when a sound of movement reached her ears. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and outside her chamber door. Her pulse quickened. She held Kieran tighter, heart hammering in her chest. Kale rose silently, moving to the door. Lyra could hear him muttering under his breath, the words low and strange, almost like a chant. The footsteps stopped, then retreated. Lyra's body relaxed slightly, though fear still lingered. You saved us," she whispered, her voice small. Kale turned, his face shadowed by torchlight. "I promised," he said softly, "and promises are not broken lightly." For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Lyra felt a strange warmth in her chest, a pull she did not fully understand. She wanted to reach out, to let herself lean on him, but fear still held her back. Days turned into weeks. Lyra began to learn the rhythms of the palace, the duties of Kale's kingdom, and the subtle rules that governed life under an alpha king. She discovered her own strength in caring for Kieran, realizing that her bond with him was more than love. It was protection, magic, and determination rolled into one. Kale watched her, silently observing the changes. He saw how she smiled more freely, how her laughter sometimes rang out in the halls, and how she began to stand taller, her shoulders stronger. Yet he also saw the moments when her fear returned, when her eyes searched the shadows, when she stiffened at the faintest noise. One afternoon, Kale approached her while she tended to the garden. Kieran was crawling nearby, exploring the soft earth. Lyra was kneeling, planting small flowers when Kale knelt beside her. "You are stronger than you think," he said quietly, his gaze resting on her face. Lyra looked up, surprised. I do not feel strong," she admitted. "I feel tired, afraid, and yet I keep moving forward because of him." She nodded toward Kieran, who waved a tiny hand at her. "Because of him," Kale smiled faintly. "Strength comes in many forms," he said. "Not just in battle or in power, but in courage, in love. And you have both." Lyra's heart skipped a beat, but she looked away, afraid to meet his gaze. She could not allow herself to feel this closeness. Not yet. That night, as the wind howled outside and Kieran slept peacefully, Lyra sat by the window, thinking of the letter and the words within it. The curse. The dark force that sought them. She shivered at the thought, yet a spark of determination ignited in her chest. She would protect her child, no matter the cost. Kale entered quietly, standing behind her. "You think too much," he said softly. Lyra shook her head. "I cannot help it. Danger. It does not wait." He knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. The touch was gentle, grounding, and she felt her heart racing. "Then we will face it together," he said. "You, me, and Kieran. Nothing can break what we share." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but they were not just tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of hope, and of something she could not yet name. Suddenly, a distant cry echoed through the palace walls. Lyra froze, clutching Kieran. Kale rose immediately, his expression fierce. "They are coming," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Prepare yourself. This is only the beginning." Lyra's heart pounded. Fear and determination clashed within her. She knew the coming days would test her in ways she could not imagine. And yet, for the first time, she did not feel completely alone. Kale was there, steadfast and strong, and for the first time in years she dared to believe in the possibility of protection, love, and hope. Outside, shadows gathered, and the wind whispered of power, danger, and destiny. Lyra held Kieran close, ready to face whatever came next. And in the silence of the night, she felt the first stirrings of something powerful, something that could change their fate forever. The shadow had come again. It moved with silent precision across the palace grounds, slipping between the trees in the garden like smoke in the wind. Lyra's heart pounded as she held Kieran close, the child's tiny hands clutching her fingers. She could feel Kale behind her, his presence a steady shield. They are here for him, Kale said quietly, his voice low but firm. The curse is more than words. It is a force that seeks to take what belongs to you and what belongs to me. Lyra swallowed hard, fear coiling tightly around her chest. Why would anyone want my child? Kale's eyes were sharp, scanning the darkness beyond the garden. Because he is special. The Omega bloodline carries power, and his bond with you, it is stronger than most magic in this world. Some would do anything to control it. Lyra hugged Kieran closer. I will not let them. Kale nodded. Then we must be ready. Not just to defend him, but to face the force that sent this shadow. They moved quickly, Kale guiding them through secret passages of the palace that Lyra had never seen. Torches flickered along the walls, casting shadows that danced like silent watchers. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation. Finally, they reached a small room carved into the stone of the palace's northern tower. It was simple, with a single window that looked out over the snow-dusted mountains. Lyra set Kieran down on a soft rug, letting him crawl freely while she paced. I don't understand, she admitted. How can magic curses even exist? I am just a mother. Kale stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You are more than that. Every bond of love, every act of courage is magic. You may not see it, but it is in you. And it is why the world has noticed your child. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She had fought so long to survive, to protect Kieran, and now she was told there was more she could do. More she must do. The weight of it pressed on her chest, but beneath it a spark of determination glowed. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from below. The walls trembled as shadows flickered in the torchlight. Kale's eyes narrowed. They have found us, he said. Lyra felt a cold shiver run through her. She scooped up Kieran, clutching him tightly. We have to run, she said, fear sharpening her voice. Kale shook his head. No, we face them here. The palace is a fortress and the child is safest here. We will not run from this. Lyra's breath caught. I don't know if I can, Kale lifted her chin gently. You can, he said firmly, because I will be with you, and together we are stronger than anything outside these walls. The shadows gathered at the base of the tower, flickering like living smoke. Lyra could feel their presence, cold and dangerous, whispering threats she could not understand. Kale drew a deep breath, his hands glowing faintly with a silver light. It was a light that radiated power, authority, and protection. Lyra's eyes widened. What is that? Kale's gaze met hers. A gift of the Alpha bloodline. We can use it to defend, to shield, to claim what belongs to us. Before she could respond, the shadows surged upward, moving like liquid against the stone walls. Kale stepped forward, his hand extended, and the light from his palm flared, striking the shadows. They hissed and recoiled but did not disappear. Lyra's fear surged. It's too strong. Kale's jaw tightened. No, we are stronger. You must trust yourself. Trust the bond. For a moment, Lyra felt paralyzed, the shadows pressing against her heart. Then she looked at Kieran, his small eyes wide and innocent, and a surge of protective power rose within her. She placed her hands on the rug beneath him, whispering words she did not know she knew, words that felt like a rhythm, a pulse of life. The room shimmered and the shadows froze, their advance halted. Kale's eyes widened slightly in surprise. You have it, he said softly. Your bond with him, it is magic. Lyra's hands trembled. I didn't know. Kale's gaze softened. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists, and you are the key to keeping him safe. The shadows hissed again, recoiling from the combined light of Kale and Lyra. But the force was persistent. Lyra realized that this was no ordinary attack. It was an ancient power, a curse woven with anger and envy. It sought to break the bond between mother and child, to claim Kieran as its own. Kale stepped closer, shielding Lyra. You will not face it alone, he said. Not now, not ever. Lyra nodded, fear and courage mingling inside her. Together they pushed back, the room glowing with light that radiated from their hearts and their bond. Shadows screamed and twisted, but they could not penetrate the barrier. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Lyra could feel exhaustion pressing against her, but she refused to let it break her. She had survived so long to protect Kieran, and she would not fail now. Kale's presence beside her was steady, a calm force in the storm. Finally, the shadows began to retreat, drawn back into the darkness from which they had come. Lyra collapsed onto the rug, Kieran still in her arms, breathing heavily. Kale knelt beside her, his hand on her back, steadying her. "You did it," he said softly. "You protected him." Lyra's chest heaved. We did it," she corrected, her voice trembling. Kale's gaze softened. "Yes, together." The room fell silent, the only sound the soft breathing of Kieran. Lyra held him close, feeling the warmth of life and love radiating from him. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. They had survived, and the bond between mother, child, and Alpha King had grown stronger. Yet even as relief washed over her, a new fear arose. This was only the beginning. The curse had been repelled but not destroyed. The force that sought Kieran's power was still out there, and it would return. Kale's gaze met hers. "You are ready," he said quietly. "Ready to fight, ready to protect, ready to claim what is yours." Lyra nodded slowly. I think I am." Kale smiled faintly. "Good. Because the world will test you again and again, but you will not face it alone." Days passed, and the bond between them grew. Lyra learned to trust Kale, not just as a protector, but as someone who cared deeply for her and Kieran. She saw moments of gentleness in him, moments where he allowed himself to laugh, to show warmth, to share the burden of fear. Kieran grew more confident, crawling and laughing freely in the palace, unaware of the danger that had come so close. His innocence was a shield of its own, a reminder of why they fought and why they could not fail. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Kale took Lyra to the balcony overlooking the valley. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "You see that?" he asked, pointing to the distant hills. "Beyond those mountains lie forces that would do anything to claim power, but they will never have you or him if we stand together." Lyra took a deep breath, the wind tugging at her hair. She felt a sense of resolve, a courage she had never known before. "We will stand," she said firmly, "together." Kale's hand brushed hers gently. "Yes, together." For a long moment they simply watched the mountains, the wind carrying whispers of destiny and power. Lyra felt the first stirrings of something she had denied for so long, trust, not just in Kale but in herself and in the strength of the bond they shared. But as night fell, a shadow crossed the balcony. Kale's eyes narrowed. "They are coming again," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Lyra held Kieran tightly, her heart racing. "Are we ready?" Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and strong. "We will be," he said, "because no force, no curse, and no darkness can break the bond we share. Not now, not ever." The wind howled, carrying with it the promise of a challenge yet to come. Lyra knew that their journey was far from over, but for the first time she did not feel afraid. She had Kale, she had Kieran, and she had the courage to face whatever lay ahead. The shadows outside shifted, restless and watching. But inside, Lyra felt a light that no darkness could touch, a bond forged in love, courage, and the promise of a future they would fight for together. The figure on the balcony moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. Its eyes glowed with a strange, cold light, and its presence carried a weight that made Lyra's heart pound. She held Kieran close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her chest. He was unaware of the danger, giggling softly as if he could sense the love surrounding him. Kale stepped in front of Lyra, his posture firm, his silver eyes flashing with resolve. "You will not touch them," he said, his voice carrying authority and power. The figure tilted its head, a faint, cruel smile crossing its face. "So this is the Alpha King," it said, voice echoing unnaturally. "And yet I can feel the bond. The magic is strong, but is it enough?" Lyra's hands tightened around Kieran. Fear surged, but beneath it, determination burned brighter. She would protect her child no matter the cost. She looked at Kale, seeing the same fire in his eyes. Together they were a force stronger than any darkness. Kale stepped forward, his hand glowing faintly with silver light. "We will see," he said. "Together, we are stronger than you can imagine." The figure's laughter was cold and hollow. Shadows surged around it, twisting like smoke, crawling toward them with a hunger that made Lyra shiver. The air thickened with power, and she could feel her heart pounding in rhythm with Kieran's small movements. Kale turned to her, his voice firm. "Lyra, your bond with him is stronger than you know. Trust it. Trust yourself." Lyra nodded, her hands trembling, but she took a deep breath. She had survived so much already. She had faced cruelty, fear, and despair. Now she would face this, not just as a mother, but as a protector, a fighter, a guardian of the bond that was stronger than fear itself. The shadows surged closer. Kale raised his hand, and a bright light emanated from his palm, striking the shadows. They hissed and recoiled, but they did not retreat. Lyra felt a warmth rising from her chest, flowing through her arms and into the space around her. She did not understand where it came from, but it was power, her power. The bond with Kieran, her love, her courage, it all converged into a force that pushed the shadows back. Kale's eyes widened in surprise. You have it. The power is yours." Lyra's heart raced. I never knew I could." "Shhh," Kale said, his voice soft but commanding. "Do not think, feel, protect him." Lyra closed her eyes and focused. She imagined a shield of light surrounding Kieran, the bond between them radiating outward. The shadows screamed and twisted, trying to break through, but they could not. The figure in the shadows roared, frustration burning in its voice. "Impossible," it shouted. "No mortal bond can resist me." Kale stepped closer, his hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. "She is no mere mortal," he said, his voice ringing with pride. "And together we are stronger than anything you can send." Lyra opened her eyes and met the figure's gaze. "Leave us," she said, her voice steady, filled with authority she hadn't known she possessed. "You will not harm my child. You will not harm me. You have no power here." For a moment silence fell. The shadows wavered, then retreated slightly, as if uncertain. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, the struggle of wills. She focused harder, letting her love for Kieran and the trust she had built with Kale flow into a radiant shield of energy that expanded around them. The figure screamed, a sound that chilled the air, then vanished into the darkness, leaving only silence and a faint trace of cold in the wind. Lyra collapsed onto the floor, clutching Kieran tightly. Her chest heaved, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief, pride, and triumph. Kale knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back. "You did it," he said softly. "You protected him. You protected us." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes shining. "We did it," she corrected, her voice trembling. "Together." Kale smiled faintly, a rare warmth softening his usually stern features. "Yes, together." The palace felt different after that night. The air was lighter, the shadows receded, and a sense of calm settled over the halls. Lyra began to see the palace not just as a place of protection, but as a home. Kieran played freely, his laughter echoing against the stone walls, and Lyra felt a peace she had never known. Days passed, and Kale took the time to teach her more about the bond she shared with Kieran. He showed her how to channel the strength of love, how to sense danger before it came, and how to stand firm even when fear whispered in her ears. Lyra learned quickly. She discovered that her bond with Kieran was more than protection. It was a source of courage, a light that could push back darkness. With Kale's guidance, she began to embrace her own strength, realizing that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Kale watched her with quiet pride. He had faced many battles, lost many he cared for, and lived with a heart closed to love for decades. Yet here in Lyra, he saw courage, wisdom, and an unwavering bond that reminded him of what he had lost long ago and what he could protect now. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Kale took Lyra and Kieran to the balcony overlooking the valley. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, the wind carrying a soft promise of hope. "You see that?" Kale asked, pointing to the distant peaks. "Beyond those mountains, the world is still dangerous, but it will never touch what we protect, not if we stand together." Lyra held Kieran close, his small fingers curling around hers. We are stronger than I ever imagined," she said softly. "Together." Kale's hand brushed hers gently. "Yes, together." For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the mountains and the valley below. The past trials, the shadows, and the curses seemed distant now, replaced by the strength of their bond and the love they shared. Kale turned to Lyra, his voice soft but filled with meaning. "I want you to know I am yours, and Kieran's, not because of duty but because of choice, because I love you both." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. I love you too," she whispered, "and I trust you with all of my heart." Kale's hand rested gently on her cheek, his touch warm and steady. "Then we are complete," he said softly. "Nothing can break the bond we share. Not now, not ever." As the night fell and the stars appeared in the sky, Lyra felt a sense of peace she had never known. Kieran slept safely in her arms. Kale stood beside her, and for the first time in years, she believed that they could face anything together. Yet even in this calm, the wind whispered of distant dangers, of shadows that lingered beyond the mountains. Lyra knew that life would always bring challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. Together, they had faced fear, magic, and darkness. Together, they had protected what mattered most, and together they would continue, stronger and unbreakable. Kale wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We are a family now," he said softly. "Bound not just by love, but by courage, by trust, and by the bond that cannot be broken." Lyra rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence, and the strength that surrounded them. "A family," she whispered, smiling. "Yes, a family." The stars shimmered above the mountains, silent witnesses to their bond. The curse had been faced, the shadows driven back, and the power of love and courage had triumphed. Yet the world remained vast and full of unknown challenges. But Lyra knew that with Kale and Kieran beside her, no darkness could ever defeat them. And so, in the quiet of the palace, with the wind whispering through the trees and the mountains standing tall, Lyra, Kieran, and Kale embraced their new life. A life of love, protection, and unbreakable bonds, a life that would shine even in the darkest of nights. The journey was not over. The world would always bring challenges, but together they were unstoppable. Together they were family. Together they were home.